So what I'd like you to do is just hold on to these for now. Okay. And let's take a look at some basics of behavior management. Okay. One of the things you find consistently throughout any literature regarding behavior plans and working with children and changing behavior is the idea of consistency. Now, why would you think that that's important? Particularly given what we've talked about with the learning methods, if you just think about that.
Like you're working with consequences, it needs to be consistent. Like when you want to reinforce the child's behavior for it being positive behavior that you would like to increase, it would have to be consistent with your reinforcers. Otherwise, your child would be, the probability of your child doing it will be unlikely because you're not giving whatever reinforcer the child is giving, whatever the reinforcer you're giving the child is not given when the child is actually exhibiting the proper behavior. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, I definitely think you got it. The consistency is important in establishing the connection for them to learn. I mean, that's what we've seen. Whether it's pairing, whether it's operant, people, if you think about it, people have jobs, right? They come to work, they get paid. Okay, that's the reinforcer. Okay, if they don't over time, that's going to be a problem. But in any case, that's just one example of another human behavior that's operantly conditioned. But the thing is that without the consistency, the connection, establishing the connection, is not going to happen. Okay, and sometimes parents have all the best intentions. That, oh no, she's jumping on the bed again, okay, so they turn off the TV. But then there's other times that doesn't happen, okay? There's actually, they're allowed to watch it, or, okay, so it's very inconsistent and it's not sending a message to them and the connection is not being made, okay? So we know that for the most part, as far as being 100% consistent, realistically, that doesn't happen in the real world with parents and everything that we're dealing with. But you just want to aim for being as consistent as possible. Okay, and that's what we want to strive for. It's always good to have patience, period, especially employing any behavior plan, because there is a time frame. It's not as if it's just going to change overnight. And depending upon the age of the child, if you're working with an adolescent, well, it took some time for them to learn these behaviors that you don't like. Okay, so it's going to take some time for them to unlearn it. Okay, and just like people that are adults that might come into therapy, some of the things we employ, we know that it's going to take some time, for behavior changes to occur. But we monitor that, But part of the reason consistency is important is that that'll help with that. The more inconsistent it is, it's working against them learning anything. Hopefully when you're working with, I don't want to say just children, but definitely bearing it in mind all the time. If it's a teacher who's employing certain strategies in the classroom, the goal should always be to promote self-esteem and confidence while teaching the new behavior, altering behavior. It's not to admonish the child in front of everybody, to shame the child, to embarrass the child. And it's unfortunate because sometimes, people opt for different strategies that they think are effective, but actually it's going to result in having an impact on the child's self-esteem and confidence. Okay? And they may see behavior change with the child, just like we said with punishment. But then also you have an individual who's been discouraged, who lacks confidence, who doesn't feel good about themselves, that sort of thing. So on the other end of the spectrum, these are people that we might see later on at some point in therapy as a result of that. So promoting self-esteem and confidence while teaching that new behavior, and devising a plan of action which focuses in on your objective. Okay. And I think the thing when we're working with parents, and I stress parents because typically we're real quick to want to put blame on ourselves for the behavior. that, we cause this behavior to happen and that kind of thing. And I think if we can frame it as professionals with people that, there's things that we've done that aren't as effective. They're not effective, and so there's other things you can do that may be effective, okay? Versus going down the road and kind of blaming, and there's a lot of guilt with that parents have when they have their child that is having conduct problems in school or wherever it might be. So it's, it's very typical to see parents get into that. So trying to keep it objective, we're talking about behavior, and there'll be things that work, and there'll be things that don't work. And every child is actually different. There's certain things we can put in place, but every child's different. So we're stressing to parents there's things that are effective and things that aren't effective, and we're just trying to evaluate it for this particular child. Any behavior plan, if you've worked with a behaviorist or you've known behaviorists that come in, what we call this actually is functional behavioral analysis, FBA. Have any of you heard of that term? Used to be called behavior modification. Anybody hear that term? Okay. That's how I learned it in school, was behavior mod, we called it. Now it's called FBO, FBA, functional behavior analysis. But pretty much uses the same principles that we've been talking about. The principles of reinforcement, of contiguity, of timing, different schedules that they put kids on. But you first need to begin with identifying what are target behaviors. Okay, and some parents will sit down and they'll list like 10 or 12 behaviors. Okay, that's too many for a behavior plan. I'm talking 2, 1 or 2. So target behavior, and again we started off with what is problem behavior. It's what basically is the behavior that you want to change. And if they say, well, she doesn't help out, she's lazy, and she has an attitude all the time, okay, what does it look like? And so again, that's what you have to get out. Now I know that you guys aren't necessarily doing behavior plans, but just to have the information, because sometimes parents are looking at helping their child by changing a behavior, but they really need to have a handle on what is the behavior that you're talking about. So once they're able to describe the behavior, so if they say, well, he doesn't comply, he's defiant. Okay, so does it look like aggression? Are we talking about, is he aggressive? Is he verbally defiant? Does he not do his chores when asked? That kind of thing. And those are the things that we would actually write down in a behavior plan, something that has to do with what the kid is doing. Now, collecting data on the behavior. What someone would do, a behaviorist that comes in the home, like from Regional Center, they really want to get a baseline on the behavior. A lot of the information is going to be collected from the parent. So we're getting reports from the parent. But we need to know, how often is this happening? Where is it happening? Because they may say, oh, it never happens at school. Oh, it never happens when he goes over to the lady next door. Okay, that's sort of, it makes us think, wait a minute, there's a contextual piece in here. Okay? So we need to know where, we need to know the frequency. Okay? And also, if possible, depending upon the age of the child, if they're over 5, what does the child feel about it? The behavior. So we want to just get as much of a handle on the behavior. One of the important things that we need to know is, are there people present? Who's present when the behavior manifests? And we also need to know what are called antecedents. What happened right before? Well, we told him he had to go to his room, or something occurred. Okay, we need to know, and that way too we can try to get a handle if is that a pattern. Is this the typical antecedent for this behavior? And then from that, we really want to try to sit down, and hopefully the behavioralist, the parent, anybody who works with that child, basically, if you have a child care provider, you want to analyze and interpret that data. And you may notice patterns in it. It may be certain times of the day. And sometimes behavior problems, they can be related to the fact that the child didn't get enough sleep, that the child is hungry. He hadn't ate. Maybe he should be eating at noon and he's eating at 1. And just that alone might alleviate it. So it's people kind of putting their heads together once they get all these pieces from collecting the data on the behavior and trying to establish, is there a trigger? Okay. What goal does it serve? Does there seem to be a purpose for the behavior? Okay, so I like I told you with my son when he was in kindergarten, I remember getting calls from the office, and they'd say, "Oh, he's in the office again," and so they want me to come and pick him up. Well, he wants me to come and pick him up because he wants to come home because he wants to be at home. So you see the problem. But also he liked going to the office. Okay, so. I would to sit down and tell people that. I mean, it sounds odd, but that's just, you see things like that with different kids, and you have to look at what's reinforcing about it. And they were quite pleasant to him. He got to do things when he went in the office, at least got to engage with them. So we need to look at all of that, and we need to establish if in fact there's something that there's a pattern in the antecedent that happens. Okay, whether it be, it might be that every time they're going to, this is at school, and every time they're going to go out for PE, the kid has some kind of behavior issue. Okay? And maybe he, is defiant, he acts up, he throws the ball. Okay, but the timing is every time they go out to PE. So there's something that's related to, that particular task, we would say. There's some antecedent there. It's either something he doesn't want to engage in, okay, or doesn't maybe feel confident in his abilities to engage in, that kind of thing. And then looking at all the other things. If there's a particular person that's present, there may be some attention-seeking behaviors that we're not really clued in on. So a team of people would look at this, and we're looking for some behaviors that might seem to be a bit of a pattern. We know that the problem behavior is a pattern, but these other things, are there patterns in anything else? Are there patterns with the timing, with the people that are present? Is it different context, or is it just one context? Because I've had some people tell me, "Oh, he's so hyper," but they bring him in, my office, and he's sitting there. It's like good as gold reading a magazine or something. It's like that kind of thing. It's like, well, that's not hyperactive.